In 1961, Dodge launched a car that to this day still sparks heated debates among enthusiasts. Some call it a bold move, while others see it as the brand's biggest mistake of the decade. But whether loved or hated, no one can deny that this car placed Dodge squarely in the spotlight during a turbulent year for the American auto industry. What made the 1961 Polara stand out wasn't just its looks or the numbers on a spec sheet. It symbolized Chrysler Group's willingness to take risks in a desperate attempt to break free from the overwhelming dominance of Ford and Chevrolet. Because of that, the Polara was more than just a car. It was a milestone, a chapter that remains both fascinating and controversial in American automotive history. And to truly understand why this car is still remembered today, let's begin our journey of discovery right now. As the 1960s began, the American car market looked like a giant stage where GM and Ford were the brightest stars. The Chevrolet Impala was the best seller, while the Ford Galaxy seemed to dominate every street. Meanwhile, Chrysler Group, including Dodge, struggled to carve out its place. Americans back then loved flash and flair. Cars had to be long, wide, glamorous, and covered in chrome. They wanted a machine that was not only for transportation, but also a statement of status. And honestly, whenever I look at those old ads, I can't help but smile. Families sitting on the beach beside a shiny Impala convertible, or young couples posing next to a gleaming Galaxy. Cars weren't just cars, they were the American dream on wheels. In that setting, Dodge stood at a crossroads. If they stayed safe, they'd remain just another follower. But if they took risks, they might rise above or crash spectacularly. The Polara was chosen as the bold gamble to change the game. One glance at the Polara was enough to leave people stunned. The front end, with its slanted headlights, looked almost like a frown. The body sides were carved with sharp, folded creases that felt distorted and awkward, and the rear, which should have balanced the design, ended abruptly with stubby fins and triangular tail lights, giving the car a bizarre, out-of-place appearance in a market that valued glamour and proportion. Unlike the flowing lines of the Chevrolet Impala or the stately presence of the Ford Galaxy, the Polara looked like an unfinished sketch that somehow made it to production. Many buyers at the time even nicknamed it the Ugly Duckling, a cruel jab at Dodge's ambition to innovate. Yet, interestingly, some enthusiasts today view it differently. To them, the Polara stands as proof of boldness, a willingness to break all molds in search of a new design language. Personally, whenever I see archival photos, I can't help but think the designers were so fixated on chasing the future that they forgot buyers still needed something pleasing to the eye. Stepping inside the 1961 Polara, Dodge's ambition to create a distinctive space is immediately clear. The dashboard was styled like a spaceship cockpit, with deep-set round gauges that glowed like radar screens. To the left of the steering wheel sat the push-button transmission, a Chrysler hallmark, compact and futuristic, setting the Polara apart from rivals like Ford and Chevrolet. The slim two-spoke steering wheel, trimmed with bright chrome, paired with a sweeping center panel, gave the driver's area a modern, almost experimental look. Higher trims offered integrated radios and electrically controlled heaters, features still unusual in many mainstream cars of the early 1960s. However, this innovation wasn't consistent. Upholstery relied heavily on cloth and vinyl, lacking the refinement of Cadillac or even Oldsmobile. Door panels used glossy plastics accented by thick chrome strips, which made the cabin feel cluttered and somewhat dated. The rear bench seat, though spacious, was flat and unsupportive, a reflection of 1950s construction methods rather than forward-looking comfort. In short, the 1961 Polara's interior blended futuristic ideas with lingering old habits. It showcased Dodge's desire to innovate, but also highlighted the limitations that prevented the cabin from achieving a truly harmonious design. But the heart of the Polara proved that Dodge never underestimated performance. Buyers could choose from a wide range of engines, starting with the 318 cubic inch V8 in the base model, moving up to the 361 and 383, and topping out with the big block 413 cubic inch, which was considered Chrysler's heavy weapon of the era. In particular, when paired with the Ram Induction system, dual long intake runners designed to optimize airflow into the combustion chambers. The Polara delivered outstanding performance in the mid-range, where most driving occurred. This gave the big sedan impressive acceleration, making it fully competitive with GM and Ford's performance models. On the road, the 413 Ram Induction Polara could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 7 seconds, an impressive figure for a full-size car in the early 1960s. In direct comparison, the Chevy Impala SS 348 or Ford Galaxy 352 could not easily outrun it, and many drivers even claimed the Dodge felt more spirited when pushed in the mid-range. In early 1960s, NASCAR, the Polara, emerged as a new challenger. With its 413 engine, it showed impressive straight-line speed, often running close with the Ford Galaxy and Chevy Impala. Yet its heavy weight and less refined chassis put it at a disadvantage in corners, where balance mattered most. As a result, despite its potential, the Polara never became a racing dominator. On highways, however, the Polara found another role. Police departments in the US needed sedans that were spacious, powerful, and durable. The 413 version delivered quick acceleration and strong torque, making it effective for high-speed pursuits. The sight of a black-and-white Polara with sirens blaring down the interstate became a familiar memory for many who lived through that era. Despite its raw power and appearances in NASCAR and police fleets, the 1961 Polara failed to win over mainstream buyers. At the showroom, customers didn't see the mighty 413. They saw a polarizing exterior that felt awkward and unattractive. That was the first and biggest barrier. Sales numbers told the story. Fewer than 15,000 Polaras sold in 1961. A dismal figure compared to Chevy's Impala or Ford's Galaxy. Dealers complained of unsold stock sitting for months, forcing heavy discounts to move inventory. Consumers nicknamed it the Ugly Duckling, a harsh symbol of Chrysler's design missteps. But styling wasn't the only issue. Driving dynamics also played a role in the disappointment. The heavy body and underdeveloped suspension made the Polara unstable at higher speeds. Buyers who expected a sporty sedan with the big block 413 soon realized the car was powerful but difficult to control, especially in sharp corners or sudden maneuvers on the highway. Compared to Ford's Galaxy, praised for its balanced chassis, the Polara felt like a brute force machine, but clumsy. The failure of the 1961 Polara was more than a sales disappointment. It shook Chrysler internally, forcing leadership to rethink its entire design strategy. While Ford and GM kept releasing models that resonated with mainstream buyers, Dodge realized it had strayed too far from what American customers actually wanted. Within Chrysler, critics argued that the design team had been too caught up in futuristic visions, forgetting balance and familiarity. Pressure from dealers who struggled to sell the Polara pushed the company to act quickly. The result came just a year later. The 1962 model emerged with a completely different look, cleaner lines, softer proportions, and a far more practical image. Dodge also shifted its mindset. Instead of chasing radical uniqueness, it aimed for a balance between style and usability. The 1962 version didn't instantly reverse Dodge's fortunes, but it signaled that Chrysler was willing to listen to the market. Even in its own time, the 1961 Polara was quickly labeled an oddball, a car that didn't quite fit within the American mainstream. Unlike the Impala or Galaxy, which stood for balance and accessible elegance, the Polara was remembered for being different. Though its sales were poor, its name became tied to the memory of a generation. Proof that not every bold idea is rewarded by the market. On American streets in the early 1960s, a Polara rolling by instantly drew attention, not for its beauty, but for its strangeness. People talked, joked, and gave it mocking nicknames. Yet that very ridicule made the Polara stand out in the crowded automotive landscape. In a sea of look-alike cars, the Polara dared to be different. From a historical perspective, the legacy of the 1961 Polara isn't commercial success, but its role as a warning marker. It reminded American car makers that while the market welcomes innovation, it pushes back hard when design strays too far from familiar aesthetics. Today, the 1961 Polara is no longer seen purely as a failure, but as a collectible with its own unique value. At classic car auctions, an original Polara often draws curiosity, even if its prices don't match those of contemporary Chevy Impalas or Ford Galaxies. On average, a well-preserved Polara 1961 can range from tens of thousands up to over $60,000, lower than its rivals, yet significant enough to prove its collectible worth. What makes enthusiasts seek out the Polara today isn't luxury or performance, but the story behind it. Owning a 1961 Polara is like holding a unique slice of Dodge's history, a car that dared to be different, took risks, and paid the price in sales. At shows, the Polara rarely takes center stage, but it almost always makes people stop and look. Older enthusiasts often recall the surprise they felt when first seeing it on the streets, a peculiarity that still sparks memories decades later. The story of the 1961 Polara highlights an undeniable truth. In the auto industry, creativity can be a double-edged sword. Dodge took a bold leap, but the gap between vision and public taste proved too wide. In the end, the Polara became proof that even powerful engines and advanced technology can't save a car if buyers aren't inspired at first glance. Yet from another perspective, the Polara reminds us that failures are what make automotive history so fascinating. Without daring experiments, we'd only see safe, familiar cars, and perhaps a much duller story to tell. So, what about you? Would you choose a safe car that blends in, or a quirky model that dares to challenge convention? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss our next journey into classic American cars.